It's a Minefield is an audio exploration produced by us, people who ride the waves of mental and emotional distress.
Our expertise comes from our lived experience, and these are the stories you'll hear, along with those who are on the journey with us.
The roller coaster of mental health can be lonely and overwhelming, but we're all in this together and would love for you to join us.
Hey guys, it's Lockie here, the audio editor. This is part 2 of our conversation with Jason the paramedic. If you missed out on part 1, head back into the feed and listen to that one first. Or take a time machine and go back to last week. Regardless, we hope you enjoy this second part to our interview with Jason the paramedic.
I think those points of connection are really powerful.
Yeah.
And it is about, not making somebody else or somebody in a vulnerable position your counsellor, but sharing part of your story, even if it's like a little bit, to make somebody feel like understood, or to impart something that from, say, taking antidepressants that they might not know.
Yeah.
Because it might be their first time taking them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think, that's a really powerful way to use lived experience. And I work as a peer worker in the system, and using lived experience is an identified part of that role. But I have very firm and ongoing kind of boundaries around what I do share.
Yeah.
Because I never would want somebody I'm supporting to turn into my psychologist or therapist.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and that's something with the blog as well that I'm cautious of. I shared, one of the first stories that I shared was about my experience with suicidal thoughts. And I, it was incredible the responses I got from that, from, oh, I didn't know, I hope you're okay, all that type of stuff, through to, oh my goodness, I didn't know you were going through that. This is my experience. And it reinforced, again, sharing that lived experience is really vital to the conversation, and allowing people to actually come forward and share their stories as well, and get that little bit of relief and debrief, I guess, around their own mental health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it maybe helps people see you as a person rather than as part of the health system.
Yeah.
Like you're working for the health system to support them, but you're not the barriers that they're facing.
Yes.
And the trauma that they might have experienced through the health system.
Yeah. And I think it's, we're working within the system at the end of the day. And I think, again, providing some of that insight into, I agree, things aren't perfect. I can't make that change. I can't change that for you. But this is some other avenues that you might be able to go down, because this is what I did when I was struggling, a few years ago. And especially with my colleagues as well. There's a big culture within ambulance that, just toughen up and get on with it. And so sharing my experience about seeing our New South Wales ambulance psychologists, for example, and how amazing they were for me when I was going through that crisis. And I wouldn't be here right now today talking to you if I didn't actually make that step to actually see them, and sharing that you can actually trust them, because trust is obviously a big thing within a big organisation, and you don't want to talk to your employer about mental health issues, especially in this job. And so knowing that you can go to someone within the organisation with expertise in the field that you can trust, and it's not going to go any further unless obviously they need to, get you more help at the end of the day. And I know that I've been able to refer people to our psychologists within New South Wales Ambulance. And, again, great outcomes over the, 6, 12 months that they've been seeking help. Because I experienced that, and I know that their experiences are different, but they can at least seek some help and start the process with our in-house psychologists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to see somebody like yourself who has sought help and has seen some shifts within themselves.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's really nice it's actually really nice and rewarding to share some of that knowledge with people. As hard as it is some days to talk about, it is nice and to see them kind of come out the other end where they're starting to, like, their mood's starting to lift, and you can see that at work because they're seeking help. And it is quite rewarding, and I see that with the blog sometimes as well. Every now and again, oh, you're the running paramedic, and I'm like, oh, I'm the part-time running paramedic. Sometimes not. But it's really nice to get some of that feedback around it as well. It's not the reason I do it, but obviously it helps to keep that going and keep sharing my story and whatnot, and the roller coaster ride sometimes that it is.
Yeah. Did you have anybody within New South Wales Ambulance or like a friend or like loved one in the community before, I guess, you started talking about your struggles and I guess seeking support for them? Did you have anyone who was kind of like a catalyst for you, who kind of told you part of their story about engaging with support?
So my crisis point came when I injured my back, and I was on workers comp, so I was on light duties. And what came with that was the financial struggles, because we go down to base wage, which is atrocious, unfortunately. And I had to get that in there.
Like health,
yeah, absolutely.
The health system is full of atrocious pay.
I thought I was doing really well, coping really well, but there was a point where I noticed that I was getting really angry. I was struggling to kind of see a way out of the situation, and I saw my family struggling financially, saw my kids struggling because I couldn't pick them up, I couldn't do anything for them. And so my point was actually talking to some other people on light duties, and there was a bloke, Jason, same name.
Great name.
It was handy.
Yeah.
Made it easy to remember. That we used to go for walks every now and again and just talk about what was going on. He was also on light duties as well, and we used to kind of just walk around the lake and share. And I think, for me, I knew that I needed to do something. And the night before, I was very close to killing myself. I actually emailed our psychologist and I said, hey, I think I need an appointment with you, because I was working in the same office anyway, so it was easy. I think I need to see you this week, if we can set up an appointment. And at the same time, I was thinking my back surgery was going to be rejected by the insurer. And so, again, that light at the end of the tunnel just wasn't there for me. That's kind of how it kicked off. And I'm really lucky that I got through that night. I woke up quite ashamed that I had some very, very clear thoughts and a plan. But I was really thankful that I had somehow recognised that day that I needed some help, and I was able to see the psychologist. We put in a safety plan, and then I got a referral from her and then my GP, obviously, to go and see a psychologist regularly and whatnot. And, a lot of my issues aren't necessarily work-related, but I can tell you right now, I probably wouldn't be where I am without those staff psychologists within New South Wales Ambulance. And I cannot stress it enough to the paramedics out there to utilise them, because they're there, they care about us a lot. And, unfortunately there's, not one for every paramedic, but it's a good starting point to see what you might need in terms of your mental health. And it doesn't matter whether it's work-related or not. As well. It doesn't have to be work-related, and it's all confidential. Nobody else knew that I was what was going on in that session with Kim, and I, as I said, I cannot thank her enough for giving me the time. What I thought was going to be 30 minutes in there was about 2.5 hours. It's then putting up with my dribble and whatnot.
It sounds like that small step in reaching out at the time when things were really really low, did that give you a little bit of that light at the end of the tunnel?
And I hadn't. Absolutely. And I think Kim put things in perspective for me once I was in that session with her. And as I said, I felt good, leading into that session. But obviously, she recognised that my moods were going so low that I didn't necessarily recognise how low I was and whatnot. And I wouldn't have. So when your mood gets so low, you don't seek help because there's only one way out at that point. For some people, and she recognised that I could get there again. So putting in that safety plan, giving me the confidence to have that conversation with my wife as well, because she didn't really know where my headspace was at. She knew that I was struggling, but not to the extent that I was, because we're obviously good at hiding things.
Yeah, and
so. Just that one email to Kim, reaching out, and as I said, I'm lucky I got through that night and recognised that I needed help.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people that don't recognise that they need help, and allowing some of that vulnerability in our job. We need to be strong and tough all the time, and something I've learned is to actually be vulnerable in the job.
Yeah.
Which is really hard. Really hard.
Because sometimes a lack of vulnerability or putting walls in place it is protective.
Yeah.
And it's like nobody can see how I feel.
Yep.
But then those feelings just build up.
Yeah, and it's quite isolating. It's a word I use a lot. I felt so isolated both on workers' comp and then with the feelings that I had.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I was talking to other people that I realised that, you're not on your own.
Yeah.
The reason for being in that low mood might be slightly different, but the feelings are very much the same. And people actually do have an understanding of what you're going through, and what you're experiencing. So it's kind of, again, if you allow yourself to be vulnerable, you'll see that you're not on your own.
Yeah.
And that's something, again, I found with the blog, is that it was quite therapeutic for me because I realised that I started it because I felt so isolated and I realised I wasn't. And because we weren't having that conversation a lot at work, if I thought that if I can share my story, we might get other people to open up and talk. And it's been really interesting seeing how many people talk to me about their experiences, whether it be, some simple anxiety issues that they've been having, that hasn't necessarily held them back, but they're willing to talk about, through to, some more serious mental health issues that they're facing that, they should be seeking more help for. And having these experiences have allowed me to kind of impart some of that knowledge and insight into what's going on and that they're not alone. Yeah. I don't give specific stories, but I certainly have. I think I had about 20 or 30 messages after I shared my first blog post, which is titled "The Night I Almost Died," and the amount of people that came back with similar stories, and that, same thing. They woke up the next morning feeling quite ashamed, but they were very happy they rode out that really low mood, and got through the other end, and it was by sharing the fact that so many people actually messaged me and whatnot afterwards or emailed me, it, I think it shows that we're not alone in what we're experiencing. No matter how isolated we feel. There's a lot of people out there that, in our profession, in health across the board, that probably get into it because we have had mental health issues.
Yeah.
We have seen what it's like, and we want to care for those that are experiencing the similar things. And back to that first question, maybe that's why. Yeah. Maybe that's why I got into this profession. Maybe that's what pushed me without even knowing.
Yeah, maybe. Is vulnerability and sharing your story an everyday decision that you make, particularly around like vulnerability? Is that a decision you make every day to be like, hey, I can be vulnerable?
As much as I can. I think there's some days I just don't feel like talking, of course. I'm tired. You're human. And I also don't want to take on other people's trauma some days, because when you share, you normally get some sharing back, and you take on that other people's trauma and experiences. So I think that's why I also need my 5 days off, because I do take on a lot of a lot of those experiences from people.
Yeah.
So I think I do make it a conscious decision. I don't write the blog as much as what I was initially, and it's because, again, time restraints. I probably have about 5 different blog posts that I've got in draft at the moment that I just can't quite finish. But whenever something pops up in my head, I will generally share it. I'm quite open with most people, and it's incredible some of the conversations I've had, even just over the past 4 shifts. Like I finished night shift this morning, and even last night having some of those conversations with people. And I'm quite privileged that people are willing to open up to me about their own struggles as well. I know that it's not every day that people are willing to actually talk to you about this stuff. And I'm quite lucky that people do, because it helps me as well. I realise that every night, I'm having a bit of a low mood. I'm like, oh, wait, this person's having that too. Yeah. Okay, cool. I'm not on my own. I'm not as isolated as I thought.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's kind of a bit of an antidote to loneliness, and that's connection and sharing.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean you're always going to be 100% vulnerable. What even is 100% vulnerable?
Right.
And you're allowed days where you're like, I don't want to fucking talk about it.
Yeah, that's right.
But, but like having those connections and knowing that they're possible.
Yeah.
When you feel like you've got the emotional capacity for it.
And it also, I think it helps with, our kids as well a little bit, where, when they're feeling a bit anxious, me and my wife will be a bit vulnerable with them and tell them how we felt before and in the past. And we hope that they can kind of grow up to have some insight into anxiety and depression and recognise when it's actually there, as opposed to just letting it go until your early 30s and then it just gets to crisis point.
I think, having conversations about it now, both with your colleagues and with your kids and stuff, it's like equipping people with the tools to talk about their emotions and not hide them. And things like substances and stuff and alcohol, that's part of hiding them, and I've definitely used that, and that seems to be part of your experience as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see that substance abuse at work. It's not necessarily prevalent in the workplace. Like I certainly can't say I've ever worked with anyone that I've thought has been under the influence. But outside of work, on their 5 days off, there's definitely alcohol is a big coping mechanism for people to relax. And I think even just our patients, you go to those people that are on the ice, the heroin, even just a lot of the recreational drugs that we see, we used to see on a Friday, Saturday night, we're seeing as kind of they've become regular users. And so kind of, again, building that trust is kind of smashing through some of that stigma and allowing them to be open with what they're doing, what they're actually doing and using and how they're using in particular. Because some people might be open to talking about, they smoke ice, but injection's the next step, and they're not willing to talk about that. Even though for us as experienced paramedics, it's quite obvious that there's, they are injecting. Broaching that subject with them and approaching how we approach it, we have to build that trust first before they're willing to talk to us about it, and we might be able to, again, break that cycle for them, be that listening ear and let them tell their story, because just because you abuse drugs doesn't mean you're a bad person. No. I might have been obnoxious when I was drunk, but I don't think I was a bad person necessarily. And I know that a lot of people that use drugs as coping mechanisms, they're doing it for a reason. Because it's a survival strategy and a coping mechanism that has some hairy side effects. But it is about surviving and getting through something that seems insurmountable, I think. Yeah, absolutely. And I think again, if we can just break through that stigma and not judge people, again, like you're gonna cast judgment, but being aware of it, aware of that judgment and that bias, because it's not what you're used to in your life. Just because it's not something that you understand doesn't mean you can't just accept it and listen at the end of the day. I really get a lot of job satisfaction out of dealing with the psychology behind the job. I have a real passion for it. It sounds like you really enjoy connecting with people. As long as it's one-on-one. No crowds. No crowds. Yeah, no crowds. No big events. No big events, just one-on-one things. I don't know, New Year's Eve in the park. No. Fair enough. Just
like a couple of final questions. I guess, first of all, earlier in the interview, you were talking about, I guess, the culture in New South Wales Ambulance traditionally being like kind of toughen up. Do you see that shifting?
I see it slowly shifting. There's definitely, like, historically, there's still a lot of kind of trust issues about opening up about people's mental health. And so there's still that, you know, from some paramedics there's that expectation, or from senior paramedics there's the expectation that, you know, you just got to toughen up and get on with the job. And some days you do, because, again, like, we're going to these, you know, major car accidents, and we need to separate the emotion and focus on the clinical aspect of it all. But then afterwards, we need to be able to debrief. We need to be able to talk and let go of some of that emotion around it, and recognise the emotion that was going on that we've just put to the back burner. And sometimes it's really hard. Like, I know my wife, I'm a very different person now to when I started at 21. I used to be the crier in my relationship. My brothers still give me shit about crying in Free Willy when the whale was freed, and when I was 5 years old.
Tears are welcome.
So yeah, but I actually struggle to cry now, because I struggle to bring back that emotion after 13 years of this job, and I know it's there, and I do still experience it. I experience it more now than what I used to, thanks to the help. But like, I welled up the other night at we went to a deceased patient who was expected to pass away, but I actually welled up with this family, and, you know, the wife was hugging me and sobbing on my shoulder, and I actually, as much as I didn't like welling up on the scene, I realised it's actually quite healthy. I'm like, oh wait, maybe I am a bit normal. Hey, I do have emotions. Oh, look at that. So, you know, just kind of, again, it's breaking down that stigma with people. It is slowly happening. I don't know how far we can go. I think it's going to take a long time. You know, it's changing culture is generational. And so as new paramedics come through, part of my role as a mentor is to ensure that we're slowly changing that culture, where we can talk about the issues, where we're not judged for having the emotion on the job, and we're allowed to have a cry after a job if we want to. And I think that's really vital and healthy to, again, a long career where we don't burn out as much, because burnout's a big issue in this job. And I think part of that is we're not recognising the emotion involved, you know, that empathy that, you know, we are actually taking on people's trauma, and then we're not dealing with that. So then we can't deal with our own at the end of the day. So it's slowly changing, but I'm really interested to see over the next 10 years where we go. And I think the team, our support services are really, really good. It's just recognising that you might need to use them. Yeah. And it's still on the individual, of course, to use them. No one can be forced to seek help within our profession. So, and that, I think part of it is that building that trust again with paramedics to seek out that mental health support, and allowing themselves to be vulnerable is the big thing, I think. Vulnerability is seen as a weakness, and it really isn't. Like I've learned, again, over the past few years, that being vulnerable actually makes you quite strong.
It does.
And helps.
Yeah. And I think I really applaud your vulnerability through the blog and in talking with us today, and also in talking with your colleagues and your family and friends about mental health. Yeah,
I do get a lot of enjoyment out of it. You know, I say, I'm selfish because I do it for me as well because I get something out of it. But and
that's okay.
But I also I really do want to change the culture. Yeah, I want to see things change within our profession and with the healthcare system where we can start to recognise that bias and we can start to recognise our own emotions and vulnerability because we're allowed to be vulnerable at the end of the day.
We are, and it actually allows us to be there more for other people. Yeah. And also for ourselves.
Yeah. And that's it. I think my vulnerability has definitely made me a better paramedic. Yeah. You know, again, not with all the skills and stuff that I have, but just that dealing with the emotional side of the job when people are at crisis point is definitely that vulnerability has definitely helped, because people are more willing to share and open up and use you as a support person.
And even that story you just told about the patient who passed away, and you were welling up like when his wife was crying and sobbing in your kind of arms, that to me would have made her emotions felt recognised, and that you weren't just like a blank slate, you know, and not responding to a really difficult situation. Yeah.
And I go very monotone at times when, you know, I'm breaking that bad news. I try to, as much as I can, to put the emotional side into it, but I also know those difficult conversations sometimes, like I need to I need to be blunt sometimes, and I need to get that information out. So I did that first, and then we can support the emotions that they're going through and the feelings that they're going through. And again, that it's something that I've learnt as well, is that you're allowed to be blunt with people. People need the truth. People don't want to hear the bullshit.
No.
You know, it's that mental health patient doesn't want to think that everything's going to be fixed in a day. You know, it's about that journey, and sometimes that's what I share is my journey, is the fact that I was seeing a psychologist for so long, you know, fortnightly. And, you know, gradually I've been able to work my way to, you know, now I'm not spending the money, unfortunately. Well, it's a good thing that I'm not spending that money every fortnight. You know, I can also see that growth in myself, where I am actually, you know, if I can share that with people, that there's not that quick fix, that they've got to actually work on it. They've got to seek the support. It's really nice when I see people actually do that as well, not just based on my advice, but if, you know, they share their stories around seeking help and open up, it's going to help someone else, that they, you know, someone that relies on them for that support. And that's the other thing, is that we've all got to feel someone that we can find support in the workplace. And for a lot of my colleagues, they're the support for other colleagues or friends outside of work. And so sharing is really important in that.
Thanks for tuning in.
It's a Minefield is produced by Chris Jaeger,
Hannah Achilles.
And Leon Fernandez.
Audio by Lockie Hilda.
We're kindly supported by the Mental Health Commission of New South Wales.
You can reach out to us at iamf.org.au. And remember, we're all in this together.